You know that moment when your entire world shifts on its axis? When everything you thought you knew about the people who raised you crumbles in a single sentence? I'm about to tell you about mine, and I need you to understand something from the start. This isn't just my story. This is the story of every person who's ever been betrayed by the people they trusted most. Every person who's ever discovered that love can be a lie and family can be the cruelest joke of all. It was Thanksgiving, November 26th, 2023. I remember the date because it's burned into my memory like a brand, the kind of date that divides your life into before and after. Before I knew the truth, and after I learned that the people who gave me life had been systematically destroying my future. Picture this: their house. Not my house, their house. Because let me be clear about something right now. I never lived there. Not really. This was the mansion they bought with money that should have been mine. Soft jazz playing from hidden speakers. The kind of pretentious background music that's supposed to make you feel sophisticated. Candles flickering on a dining table that cost more than I made in 6 months. Crystal glasses catching the light, throwing tiny rainbows across walls painted in colors I couldn't even pronounce. And there I was, sitting at that table like a grateful little puppet, playing the role of the successful daughter who'd made it on her own, laughing at my father's terrible jokes, complimenting my mother's cooking, though we all knew she hadn't touched a single dish. That's what the housekeeper was for. The housekeeper they could afford while I was eating ramen noodles for dinner 4 nights a week. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me paint you the full picture of that moment, the moment everything changed. My grandfather, Grandpa Joe, we called him, was sitting at the head of the table, 83 years old, sharp as a tack, with eyes that missed nothing. He'd always been my champion, the one person in that family who seemed to see me, really see me, who asked about my struggles without immediately trying to fix them or minimize them, who listened when I talked about working 2 jobs just to keep my head above water. So when he lifted his glass that night, I thought it was going to be one of his usual toasts. Something about gratitude, about family, about how proud he was of all of us. I was actually smiling when he started to speak. "I want to make a toast," he said, his voice carrying that authority that comes with age and respect. The whole table went quiet. Even my cousin's kids stopped their chatter. "I'm so glad to see you're finally using the education money we saved for you." And that's when time stopped. I was mid-bite, a fork full of turkey and stuffing halfway to my mouth, and I just froze because those words didn't make sense. Education money? What education money? What money? Those 2 words came out of my mouth before I could stop them. Sharp, confused, and suddenly the warmth in that room evaporated like steam from a cup of coffee left too long on a winter windowsill. Every sound died. The jazz stopped, or maybe I just stopped hearing it. The clink of silverware against china went silent. Even the kids seemed to sense that something had shifted, something big and terrible and irreversible. The only sound was the soft clink of my mother's wine glass as her hand started to shake, and that's when I saw it. The look on my mother's face, pure, unadulterated terror. Her face went white, not pale, white, like all the blood had just drained from her body and pooled somewhere around her feet. My father wouldn't meet my eyes. He was suddenly very interested in his mashed potatoes, pushing them around his plate like a child who didn't want to eat his vegetables. My grandfather looked confused, genuinely confused. He glanced around the table, taking in the faces, reading the room like he was trying to solve a puzzle that had suddenly appeared in front of him. The account we started when you were born, he said slowly, his voice taking on a different quality. Cautious now, uncertain. The education fund? Your parents said you were grateful for it, that it helped you get through college and get established. The silence that followed was deafening. It was the kind of silence that screams, the kind that tells you everything you need to know without anyone saying a word. And then my cousin Sarah, sweet, innocent Sarah, who'd never kept a secret in her life, whispered the words that shattered my world completely. Wait, she doesn't know? Let me tell you something about betrayal, real betrayal. Not the kind you see in movies where someone cheats on their spouse or tells a friend's secret. I'm talking about the kind that reaches into your chest and rips out everything you thought you knew about yourself, about your life, about the people who were supposed to protect you. Because in that moment, sitting at that table surrounded by the smell of turkey and lies, I realized that my entire adult life had been built on deception. Every struggle I'd endured, every sacrifice I'd made, every night I'd gone to bed hungry because I couldn't afford groceries and rent in the same week. It had all been unnecessary. I thought about the job at the diner where I worked graveyard shifts, serving coffee to drunk college kids and cleaning up their messes for $7 an hour, plus tips that barely covered gas money. I thought about the retail job I worked during the day, standing on my feet for 8 hours, dealing with customers who treated me like I was invisible, like I was less than human. I thought about choosing between textbooks and food, about wearing the same 3 outfits to class because I couldn't afford anything new, about walking everywhere because my car had been repossessed and I couldn't afford another one, about studying in the library because I couldn't afford to heat my tiny studio apartment. And all the while, there had been money, my money, money that had been saved for me, meant for me, intended to give me the foundation I needed to build a life. Money that had been sitting somewhere, earning interest, growing, waiting for me to claim it. Except I never got the chance, because the people who'd given me life had decided to take my future instead. I don't remember driving home that night. I know I did, because I woke up in my own bed the next morning, still in my dress clothes, still wearing the shoes that had given me blisters. But the drive itself is a blank. My mind had retreated somewhere deep inside, trying to process what I'd learned, trying to make sense of the senseless. But I do remember what happened when I got home. I remember sitting on my couch, the used couch I'd bought from Goodwill for $40, and opening my laptop. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely type, but I needed to know. I needed to understand the scope of what had been done to me. Do you know what it's like to discover that your parents, the people who brought you into this world, who were supposed to love you unconditionally, who were supposed to protect you from harm, had been systematically robbing you for over 2 decades? Because that's what this was. Not a misunderstanding, not a miscommunication. Theft, pure and simple. I spent that entire night searching. Bank websites, legal aid websites, forums for people who'd been victims of financial abuse. Because that's what this was. Abuse. Financial abuse committed by the people who were supposed to be my safety net. And with each click, with each article I read, with each forum post that resonated with my experience, the anger grew. It started as a small flame in my chest, barely noticeable among all the other emotions swirling around inside me. But it fed on the truth. It fed on the realization that I had been working myself to the bone while they lived in luxury. It fed on the memory of every time they'd watched me struggle and said nothing. Every time they'd let me believe that this was just life, that this was what building character looked like. The flame became a fire, and the fire became a rage so pure, so clean, so righteous that it burned away everything else. The love I'd felt for them, the respect, the obligation, the guilt I'd carried for not being the daughter they wanted me to be, all of it burned away, leaving only the truth in its wake. I called the bank the next morning. It took 3 transfers and 2 hours on hold, but I finally reached someone who could help me. A woman named Janet who spoke in a soft voice and seemed to understand that this wasn't just a routine inquiry. I need to ask about an account that may have been opened in my name, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. An education fund that was supposedly started when I was born. There was typing on the other end. Clicking. More typing. I do show an account that was opened in 1995, Janet said. A custodial account with your name on it. My heart stopped because part of me had been hoping this was all some terrible misunderstanding. Part of me had been praying that my grandfather had been confused, that there had never been any money, that my parents were innocent of everything except maybe poor communication. What's the current balance? I asked, though I already knew the answer. The account shows a zero balance as of March 15th, 2021. March 15th, 2021. I knew that date. That was 2 months before they'd bought their house. Their beautiful, perfect house with the gourmet kitchen and the 3-car garage and the swimming pool in the backyard. Can you tell me about the withdrawal history? More typing? A longer pause. I'm seeing regular withdrawals starting in 2015, Janet said carefully. They appear to have been authorized by the account custodians. The account custodians, my parents, the people who were supposed to be protecting my money, had been spending it instead. For 6 years, they'd been draining my future to fund their present. And they'd been doing it while watching me struggle, while listening to me worry about money, while knowing that I was working myself into the ground for no reason. The largest withdrawals were in 2020 and 2021, Janet continued. There were several transactions over $50,000. $50,000 at one time, while I was choosing between groceries and gas, while I was wearing clothes from thrift stores and eating generic mac and cheese for dinner. They were writing checks for $50,000. I need copies of all the account statements, I said, and I need to know what my legal options are. Because by then, the shock had worn off. The disbelief had faded. What remained was crystal clear purpose. They had stolen from me. They had betrayed me. They had watched me suffer while they lived off my money. And they were going to answer for it. The legal aid office was in a strip mall between a nail salon and a tax preparation service. Not exactly the kind of place that inspires confidence, but the lawyer who met with me, Maria Santos, was sharp as a blade and angrier about my situation than I was, which I hadn't thought was possible. This is textbook financial abuse, she said after reviewing the bank statements I'd printed out. Your parents had a fiduciary duty to preserve and protect these funds for your benefit. Instead, they treated your account like their personal piggy bank. She spread the papers across her desk, pointing to highlighted sections. Look at this. In 2020 alone, they withdrew over $200,000. The down payment on their house, luxury car payments, a vacation to Europe that cost more than most people make in a year. All of it funded by money that was meant to secure your future. $200,000 in 1 year. I tried to do the math in my head, tried to calculate how many shifts at the diner that represented, how many hours of standing on my feet in retail hell, how many nights of choosing between rent and food. The numbers were staggering, incomprehensible. The total amount they took over the years comes to just over $600,000, Maria continued. With interest and penalties, we're looking at close to $1 million in damages. $1 million. $1 million that should have been mine. $1 million that could have paid for college without loans, that could have bought me a house, that could have given me the foundation to build a real life instead of this constant struggle for survival. What they did wasn't just morally wrong, Maria said. It was criminal. This is grand theft, committed over multiple years, with clear intent to defraud, and the fact that they're your parents doesn't make it any less illegal. She leaned back in her chair, studying my face. The question is, what do you want to do about it? Because once we start this process, there's no going back. Your relationship with your parents will be over. Your extended family will have to choose sides. This will tear your family apart. And you know what I told her? You know what I said to this woman who was offering me the chance to reclaim my stolen future? Good. It's about time. Because here's the thing about families built on lies. They're not really families at all. They're conspiracies. They're elaborate deceptions designed to benefit some members at the expense of others. And I had been the expense for far too long. I spent the next month gathering evidence, bank statements, tax returns, property records, anything that could document the pattern of theft. And with each piece of evidence I collected, the picture became clearer and more damning. They hadn't just stolen from me once. They hadn't just made one bad decision in a moment of desperation. This had been systematic, calculated, ongoing. For 6 years, they had been making withdrawals from my account, funding their lifestyle with my future, all while maintaining the facade of loving, supportive parents. The credit card statements were the worst. Designer clothes, expensive restaurants, weekend trips to wine country, all charged to credit cards that were paid off with my money. My money had funded their taste for the finer things in life, while I was shopping at discount grocery stores and wearing clothes until they literally fell apart. But it wasn't just the money, though the money was devastating enough. It was the lies. It was the performance they'd put on every time they saw me, the concern in their voices when they asked how I was managing financially, the gentle suggestions that maybe I should work a little harder, maybe I should be more careful with my spending, maybe I should consider a second job if things were really that tight. They had watched me work myself to exhaustion. They had listened to me stress about money. They had seen me make sacrifices and struggle with decisions that no 20-something should have to make. And all the while, they had known that they could solve my problems with a single phone call to the bank. They had chosen not to. They had chosen to let me suffer so they could prosper. The anger I felt during those weeks of investigation wasn't the hot, explosive kind that burns out quickly. It was cold, calculated. It was the kind of anger that gets up every morning with a plan, that goes to bed every night with a purpose. It was an anger that fed on itself, growing stronger with each new piece of evidence, each new revelation about the depth of their betrayal. And through it all, they kept calling, sweet, innocent phone calls checking in on their daughter, invitations to dinner, to family gatherings, to holiday celebrations. They kept playing their parts in the family drama, never knowing that I was no longer playing mine. "We miss you, honey," my mother would say in her gentle voice. "You've been so distant since Thanksgiving. Is everything okay? Is everything okay?" I wanted to laugh. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell her exactly what was okay and what wasn't. But I didn't. I played along. I made excuses. I kept gathering evidence because I had learned something important during those weeks. I had learned that the people who hurt you the most are often the ones who sleep best at night. They're the ones who convince themselves that their actions were justified, that their victims somehow deserved what happened to them, that they're actually the real victims in the situation. My parents had probably convinced themselves that they deserved my money, that they had earned it by raising me, by providing for me during my childhood, by being my parents. They had probably told themselves that I would never find out, and even if I did, I would understand. I would forgive them, because that's what good daughters do. But I wasn't feeling particularly good that month. I was feeling precise, methodical, determined. Christmas was coming, and I knew it was time. Time to stop hiding, time to stop pretending, time to burn down the house of lies they had built and let them see what they had really done. So when my mother called to invite me to Christmas dinner, I said yes. I said I wouldn't miss it for the world. I said I was looking forward to spending time with the family. And I was, because I had something to give them, something they had given me first, years ago, without even realizing it. The gift of truth. I spent Christmas Eve preparing, not wrapping presents or baking cookies or doing any of the things that normal people do on Christmas Eve. I was organizing documents, printing emails, preparing exhibits, building a case that would leave no room for denial, no space for excuses, no possibility of escape. The folder was thick. Bank statements going back 8 years, property records showing the timeline of their purchases, credit card statements detailing their extravagant spending, tax returns that proved they had been living well above their declared income. A complete financial picture that told the story of their theft in numbers that couldn't lie. And at the bottom of the folder, I placed the legal documents, the complaint I would be filing, the criminal referral Maria had prepared, the civil lawsuit that would reclaim every penny they had stolen, plus interest, plus damages, plus attorney's fees. Christmas morning dawned cold and gray, perfect weather for what I had planned. I dressed carefully, not in the designer clothes they wore, bought with my money, but in my best thrift store finds. I wanted them to see me exactly as I was, the daughter they had impoverished while enriching themselves. The drive to their house felt different this time. It wasn't the nervous journey of a daughter hoping for approval. It wasn't the dutiful visit of a child fulfilling family obligations. It was the purposeful march of someone who had finally found their power and was ready to use it. Their house looked the same as always, perfect, pristine, expensive. The Christmas decorations were elaborate and tasteful, the kind that required professional installation. The driveway was full of luxury cars. Their cars, bought with my money, and the cars of family members who had no idea what they were about to witness. I sat in my 12-year-old Honda Civic for a moment before going in, looking at that house and thinking about what it represented. It wasn't just a home. It was a monument to their betrayal. Every brick, every window, every perfectly manicured shrub had been paid for with my stolen future. But I wasn't the same person who had walked into their Thanksgiving dinner 6 weeks earlier. That person had been trusting, naive, willing to believe the best about people she loved. This person was different. This person had been educated in the hardest way possible about the nature of betrayal and the price of trust. I walked into that house carrying my folder like a weapon, because that's what it was. Truth is always a weapon when you're fighting lies. Evidence is always powerful when you're confronting deception. And I had both in abundance. The scene was exactly what you'd expect from a family Christmas. Extended family gathered around, children playing with expensive toys, adults sipping wine and sharing stories. The tree was massive and perfectly decorated, surrounded by piles of presents wrapped in designer paper with elaborate bows. My parents greeted me with hugs and smiles, playing their parts perfectly. My mother complimented my outfit. "You look lovely, dear," without a trace of irony about the fact that I was wearing a dress that cost less than her handbag. My father asked about work, about my apartment, about my life, all while knowing that he could have made all my struggles disappear with a single honest conversation. We sat down to dinner, another catered feast laid out on fine china, and they began their performance again. The loving parents, so proud of their independent daughter who had made her own way in the world. The supportive family, celebrating another successful year. And I sat there, eating their stolen food at their stolen table, listening to their stolen conversations, and waiting for the right moment, the moment when I could give them the Christmas present they really deserved. It came when my father raised his glass for a toast. Another toast. Because apparently, toasts were a family tradition now. A tradition of revealing uncomfortable truths at inappropriate moments. "I want to toast our family," he said, his voice warm with artificial emotion. "We've been blessed this year with health, with prosperity, with love. We have everything we need and more than we deserve." More than we deserve. The irony was so perfect, it almost made me laugh. "Actually, Dad," I said, setting down my fork with deliberate precision, "I'd like to make a toast, too." The table went quiet. All eyes turned to me. I stood up slowly, my folder in my hand, and looked around at their faces. Family faces. Faces I had loved and trusted and believed in. Faces that were about to learn what consequences looked like. "I want to toast honesty," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the silence. "To truth, to family members who don't steal from each other." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. I could see the realization dawning on their faces, the understanding that this dinner was not going to go according to their script. "You said family means everything," I continued, looking directly at my father. "So I'd like you to explain to our family why mine meant so little that you thought it was acceptable to steal from your daughter." That's when I opened the folder. That's when I let the papers spill across their beautiful table like snow. Bank statements, financial records, evidence of their theft laid out in black and white for everyone to see. "You forged my name?" my grandfather whispered, picking up one of the bank statements with hands that had started to shake. "You stole from her future?" The silence that followed was different from the silence at Thanksgiving. That had been the silence of shock, of confusion, of secrets being accidentally revealed. This was the silence of truth being deliberately exposed. This was the silence of a reckoning that had been years in the making. My father tried to stand up, tried to take control of the situation. "You're being dramatic," he said, his voice rising. "You're exaggerating what happened." But I was done with their gaslighting, done with their manipulation, done with letting them control the narrative. "Am I exaggerating $600,000? I asked, my voice cutting through his bluster like a blade. "Am I being dramatic about the fact that you watched me work 2 jobs while you bought luxury cars with my money? Tell me, Dad, which part of grand theft am I exaggerating?" My mother started crying then, the tears of someone who had been caught, who knew the game was over, who was hoping that maternal tears might still have some power to manipulate the situation. "We did it for the house," she sobbed. "We did it for the family. We were going to pay it back." "When?" I demanded. "When were you going to pay it back? When were you going to tell me that the money existed in the first place? When were you going to stop watching me struggle while you lived in luxury?" But I already knew the answer. Never. They were never going to tell me. They were never going to pay it back. They were going to let me work myself to death while they enjoyed the fruits of their theft. and they were going to sleep soundly every night knowing they had gotten away with it. The rest of the family was frozen. My cousins, my aunts and uncles, even the children had gone quiet, sensing that something momentous was happening, something that would change everything, something that would be talked about for years to come. And through it all, my grandfather sat at the head of the table, reading through the bank statements with growing horror. This man who had worked his entire life, who had saved every penny, who had wanted to give his granddaughter a head start in life, was seeing exactly how his gift had been perverted. "There's only one side here," he said finally, his voice carrying the authority of his 8 decades. "The truth. And the truth is that you stole from your own daughter." That's when I knew I had won. Not because I had proven my case. The evidence had already done that. But because the one person in that family whose opinion mattered, whose respect meant something, had sided with truth over blood, had chosen justice over family loyalty. My parents tried to argue after that, tried to justify, to explain, to minimize what they had done. They talked about providing for me as a child, about the cost of raising a family, about how they had always planned to make things right, but their words rang hollow in that room full of evidence and witnesses, because the truth was written in numbers that couldn't be disputed. The truth was documented in bank records that couldn't be explained away. The truth was that they had stolen from me systematically, deliberately, and without remorse for years. And the truth was that I was done being their victim. I left that house for the last time that night, walking out into the cold December air with my folder tucked under my arm and my head held high. The snow was falling, big, soft flakes that caught the light from their windows and sparkled like diamonds in the darkness. And for the first time in months, in years, maybe in my entire adult life, I felt warm, not because of the temperature, it was freezing outside, but because I had finally taken back my power. I had finally spoken my truth. I had finally held them accountable for what they had done to me. The legal process that followed was long and complicated and emotionally exhausting. There were depositions and hearings and negotiations. There were attempts by their lawyers to settle out of court, to avoid the publicity and embarrassment of a trial. There were family members who tried to play peacemaker, who suggested that maybe we could work things out privately, who insisted that family should forgive family. But I was done with forgiveness that wasn't earned, done with peace that came at the price of justice, done with being the one who was expected to bend, to compromise, to sacrifice for the sake of family harmony. The criminal charges were filed in January. Grand theft, fraud, forgery, felony charges that carried real consequences, real penalties, real accountability. The civil suit followed in February, demanding not just the return of the stolen money, but punitive damages, interest, and attorney's fees. They hired expensive lawyers, of course, the best money could buy. Money that had originally been mine, now being used to defend against the consequences of stealing from me. The irony wasn't lost on anyone involved in the case. Their defense was predictable. They claimed they had intended to pay the money back. They claimed they had used it for family expenses that ultimately benefited me. They claimed I was being vindictive, that I was destroying the family over money, that I was choosing dollars over relationships. But their claims fell apart under scrutiny. The evidence was overwhelming. The pattern of theft was clear. The intent to deceive was obvious. And most damning of all, they had continued the deception even after being confronted, had tried to gaslight me into believing that I was the problem, that I was overreacting, that I was in the wrong for demanding accountability. The trial lasted 3 weeks. 3 weeks of sitting in a courtroom listening to lawyers argue about what my parents had done to me. 3 weeks of hearing them try to justify the unjustifiable, to explain the inexplicable, to defend the indefensible. But the jury saw through their lies just as clearly as I had. The verdict was swift and unanimous. Guilty on all counts. Full restitution ordered, plus damages, plus interest, plus penalties. Justice finally, after years of injustice. I won't lie to you. It didn't feel as good as I thought it would. Victory over people you once loved is a hollow thing, even when it's necessary, even when it's righteous. But it felt right. It felt like the natural consequence of choices they had made, actions they had taken, trust they had betrayed. The money started coming back in installments. They had to sell the house, of course. The beautiful house with the gourmet kitchen and the swimming pool, bought with my stolen future. They had to sell the cars, liquidate the investments, drain the retirement accounts. Everything they had built on the foundation of my theft had to be dismantled to make me whole. And through it all, they maintained that they were the victims. They told anyone who would listen that their ungrateful daughter had destroyed the family over money, that I had chosen revenge over relationships, that I had broken their hearts and ruined their lives. But here's what they never understood. What they still don't understand. This was never about money. Not really. The money was important. Every stolen dollar represented hours of my life that I would never get back, opportunities I had missed, stress I had endured unnecessarily. But the real crime wasn't financial. It was emotional. They had stolen my trust. They had stolen my sense of security. They had stolen my belief in unconditional love and family loyalty. They had taken the foundational relationship of my life, the relationship between parent and child, and corrupted it with lies and greed and betrayal. That's what I can never forgive. That's what can never be repaid. The money came back, but my innocence didn't. My faith in family didn't. My ability to trust the people closest to me didn't. But you know what? I'm okay with that because I learned something valuable in the process of reclaiming my stolen life. I learned that family isn't about blood. It's about